It's a great pleasure and an honor for me to welcome you and to introduce this conference organized with the support of the Ian Ramsay Center for Science and Religion of the University of Oxford. For the past 2 years, the world has faced an unprecedented peril, embodied by a devastating disease which shook our society to its foundation. We did, however, possess the weapons to defend ourselves against this invisible foe, and it is not only through the recent advancements in science and medicine that we are able to address this global challenge, but also through empathy, collaboration, and faith. History has taught us that we can overcome national and international crises by helping one another and promoting the mutual understanding between peoples. We are living interesting times, to say the least, times when humanity and the humanity within us are challenged, but also allowed to shine and show the best in people. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed our vulnerabilities. It revealed the fragility of our livelihood in the face of an invisible yet dangerous enemy. But at the same time, it showed how strong humanity can be when confronted with such a peril. More recently, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the tragedies of the conflict there require us once again to work together to mend the suffering and hardship of innocent lives on both sides. COVID-19 was a pandemic that affected not only our bodies, but also our minds and souls. United, multidisciplinary efforts were thus needed to heal the wounds of our society. Today's conference aims to share international experiences with the goal of improving public health by harnessing one of the fundamental spheres of society, religion and faith. Today's case studies and presentations include an important cross-cultural dimension that fosters international communication and cooperation. They will allow us to draw useful parallels between healthcare systems, national policies, and different cultural and religious settings. Through insights from several disciplines such as humanities, the social sciences, and medically related fields, but also from different cultures and religions, the conference will harness the potential of interdisciplinarity to help overcome global challenges and improve practices in the public health sector. I would like to thank you for being here today, and I encourage you, in addition to learning from today's talks, to ask questions and engage in dialogue both with other participants and with the speakers during the breaks. It is through the joint efforts of all of us, through mutual understanding and by learning from one another's experiences, that we can build a better and brighter tomorrow. The first speaker of today's conference is Adina Bezerita, MSc student at the Faculty of Theology and Religion, and her presentation will be an introduction and will focus on the philosophical aspects of the dialogues between science and religion. We'll then have a short 30-minute break during which refreshments will be provided and there will be opportunities to meet and discuss. The conference will then resume with case studies under specific national, cultural, and religious settings, and presentations on freedom of religion and belief during the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoyed today's event. I will move, and Adina sadly will be joining us online because she and some other speakers as well have sadly tested positive for COVID-19.
Greetings and welcome to this important conference on fighting pandemics in a life of faith. First, I want to thank Stefan Dascalu and the Ian Ramsay Center, and particularly Dr. Andrew Pinsent. I'll be speaking today about the relevance of syncretistic approaches in ancient philosophy and in science and religion. The emerging field of science and religion brings together seeming contraries that can shape, define, and illuminate our human existence, especially in times of crisis, such as in a pandemic. The idea of difference is prevalent in Plato's dialogue Parmenides, constructed in a wider Hellenistic context, shaped by syncretistic intrapersonal, interpersonal, and transpersonal tendencies. The modern equivalent in science and religion is the exploration of the mechanisms of meaning by engaging in cross-disciplinary dialogue for the purpose of expanding knowledge. While science and religion function through distinct conceptual lenses that make use of different methods of investigation and evidence, they represent interconnected dynamics in a greater whole. Modern scholarship, such as that of Mary Mitchley in her Owl of Minerva and Alistair McGrath's Territories of Human Reason, deconstructed the power dynamics and cultural agendas of those who portray science in battle with religion, and proposed that the polemical attitude needs to be discerned and articulated in order to facilitate meaningful dialogues across the spectrum of knowledge. According to Peter Harrison, one of the pioneers of science and religion as mutually informing, religion facilitates scientific inquiry. Likewise, he argued that whenever science makes a discovery, religion itself advances. In the circumstances of unresolved conflict power struggles ensue allow with suffering due to either the loss of or the lack of reason. This was the case in the Hellenistic times when syncretism began to fall apart after Alexander the Great due to the hidden agendas of the ruling class and the unwillingness to find a mean between differing perspectives. Science and religion afford the challenge of finding a meaningful approach in the interaction between fields of study and between realities. Peter Harrison argued for a reconfiguration of the relationship between science and religion and advocated for the recognition of the context of their linguistic framework. He pointed to the need to question the conflict stipulation or interpretation, the narrative underlying seemingly opposing positions. McGrath, in his introduction to Science and Religion, notes the error of strict literalism that reflects or concretizes prejudices. This would be called reification. The case of Galileo Galilei was a recognizable example in the 16th century of the thinking fallacy that framed a science versus religion warfare that defined the polemics which led to his condemnation. Thus, we ask, what is the cause of the conceptual rigidity that obfuscates our minds and filters our views of reality? It is well known that Aristotle exerted a great deal of influence over the development of the natural and social sciences in medieval Europe. Aristotle emphasized on the empirical method to preserve the phenomena, which was helpful in the emergence of the natural sciences. However, he mentions in his Nicomachean Ethics that his approach may err due to opinions. In his Metaphysics, Aristotle notably points to the understanding as a cognitive threshold to the intelligible realms. Unlike Aristotle, Plato's position defends a view that integrates relative knowledge and orients it through the fullness of understanding into a hierarchy that culminates in wisdom. On this view, opposites are united by mean analogy into a higher cause, as indicated by his Parmenides' second hypothesis, unlike the strict dualism of the fifth hypothesis, characteristic of Aristotelian logic. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Émile Brière reminds us that beneath the idea of difference, we can detect an essential unity. The syncretism of opposing views was well known to the Neoplatonists, such as Proclus, who said that a term equally present to all terms in a series can explain them all only if it is not in one of them or in all of them, but prior to all of them. The unifying impulse underlies reversion to the source, and it is in this mode that reasoning can make syntheses. Subsequently, the procession from principles onto conceptual frameworks was partly discerned in the 12th and 13th century by Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologica. Yet in the same epoch, the birth of simultaneously divergent authoritarian and rational methods became the argumentative dogma and the basis of scholarship. The 13th century was characterized by intense disputes regarding the perceived contradictions between reason and faith. The 14th century gave rise to the polemic between antiquity and modernity, and the rejection of antiquity in favor of modernity. A further rejection of metaphysical claims ensued in favor to the views of conceptual empiricism. The main conflict of the 13th, 14th centuries reflected in the contradictions between particular and universal, internal and external realities, nominalist and metaphysical positions, and the attempt at denying the syncretistic approaches of antiquity in favor of modern relativity. Metaphysical speculations were seen as a pathos, utilized to trivialize ancient wisdom. In the 17th century, however, classical antiquity posed a great danger to science and faith. It is in this period that with the invention of the printing press, boundaries between specialities became more formidable, according to Elizabeth Einstein's in her printing press as an agent of change. In this time, contrasts, opposites, or contradictions were not yet seen nor understood as being aspects of a unified reality indicative of a higher, more comprehensive knowledge. There are obvious parallels between scientific and theological inquiries that deploy the interactive use of human and cosmic reason. The Greeks discerned the idea of nous, active through the universal intellect, woven by the logos that permeates the whole of reality. The field of science and religion engages with critical realism, which implies an accommodation of understanding both subjective and objective phenomena. Thomas F. Torrance, Ian Barber, Arthur Peacock, and John Polkinghorne all adopt forms of critical realism based on William James's emphasis on the active role of the knower in the process of knowing. In 1897, William James emphasized that one must be aware of the knower in the process of gaining knowledge. He posits that the structures within the mind are disclosed by the universe itself, and that the knowledge can be increased if the knower is open to the unknown. Alistair McGrath begins a cross-disciplinary dialogue by raising the question of what are the theological implications of approaching the various branches of natural science through critical, realistic investigations. In this manner, McGrath challenges the further development of critical realism. Critical realism includes an overarching view that considers the knower and the link between what is known and the unknown. Through the work of Mary Midgley and Alistair McGrath, I note a common thread from the Hellenistic, Renaissance, and the 19th century, the attempt to consolidate seemingly irreconcilable philosophical, scientific, and religious views that, as a whole, weave a collegiate knowledge. A synergistic congruence between the principles of ancient knowledge and emerging research in science and religion enhances our views of reality. One of the benefits of syncretistic approaches is the awareness of a nexus that facilitates cross-investigations that proceed towards higher agencies. Ian Barber claims that cross-disciplinary dialogue is necessary and proper, yet different areas of engagement and interaction depend on self-referential aspect of our personal awareness. This presentation also raises the experiential question of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity synergy that affects the self and consequently the knowledge of the whole. The reemergence of syncretistic approaches from ancient philosophy in science and religion encourages the dialogue among fields that enrich knowledge by complementary perspectives that shape a complex world, itself part of a greater whole. But how to navigate cross-disciplinary dialogue? Alistair McGrath suggests that the use of models and analogies. Representations in science and religion are framed in terms of models and analogies. An analogy employs the use of hypotheses to stimulate higher knowledge. Niels Bohr, a 1922 Nobel Prize winner in theoretical physics, held that a complex situation, such as the behavior of light and matter, had to be represented by using two apparently contradictory and incompatible models. The principles of holding together two apparently irreconcilable models of a complex phenomenon in order to account for its behavior is known as the principle of complementarity. Analogy is the intelligible mechanism that can resolve the tensions between realities and between views, such as those that frame the debates in science and religion. In Plato's Timaeus at 31c, analogy is described as the most beautiful of bonds that most perfectly unites into one, both itself and the things it binds together. Mary Midgley suggested that a single perspective of reality, if allowed to become normative, renders bizarrely restrictive views that lack meaning. This is why we need the conglomerate of maps indicative of multiple approaches to knowledge. It is widely accepted that the natural sciences are seen as leading our modern intellectual thought. However, they will be served well by being supplemented in mutual dialogue with religion and with philosophy. The refined intellectual ways of science, religion, and philosophy seem somewhat removed from the myriad of concerns of the wider public, and it can be a great leap from our thorough research in academia to adapting and implementing ideas and discoveries in everyday life. However, there is a beneficial transformative potential in doing so. Science and religion are now presented not as two strictly separate fields, but as complementary perspectives of one whole that revives ancient, particularly Hellenistic, cross-disciplinary and transdisciplinary methodologies. And such views are well documented in Alistair McGrath's magnum opus. In McGrath's own words, it is a productive and constructive conversation between science and religion that is well receptive and adaptive, as any views should be, to both arguments and counter-arguments. As it pertains our conference, it is clear that the medical, spiritual, and existential aspects in the pandemic, having affected many lives, can be seen as important elements of the problem as a whole. Consequently, advocacy for education that makes use of ancient wisdom by fostering multidisciplinary exchanges is that much more relevant today. In conclusion, in the world, we can see diversity from a hierarchical order bound by analogy. Thus, we need to readopt and readapt the syncretistic approaches of antiquity that are aware of the infinite unity, of infinite possibilities, of the many realities interacting at the intrapersonal, interpersonal, and suprapersonal levels that can elevate our well-being in the global community. Thank you.